Excellent. Key factor there, everything working. We're setting up the broadcast right now. Okay, you tell us when you're ready. Key factor there, everything working. No. Sorry. All right, you ready to go? All right, we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Karen Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Scarborough Economic Development Corporation, and we're here to really have perhaps a more technical conversation with the folks in the room on the proposed ordinance and impact fees that the town is looking at. I'd like to do a couple of things. One, I'd like to start with introductions around the room and online. And then after that, Angela is going to, actually, I think we'll start with the environmental or standards. Okay, no, we'll start, sorry. We're going to start with, yeah, we're going to start with impact fees. Angela's going to go through that. And we thought we would do each individually. So we'll do the impact fee presentation, and then we'll talk about that. And then we'll move on to Autumn and the environmental standards. So let's just take a moment and introduce ourselves. John?
Good morning, John Krasnick, current board member, chair of the Scarborough Economic Development Corporation and commercial lender at Atlantic Federal Credit Union.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Fairkey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Landry French Construction. So welcome to our office, by the way.
Thank you. Joe Fistacci, residential developer with Star Homes.
Matthew Orr, civil engineer, project manager at SEDCO Technics.
Another, it's Sebago Technics, civil engineer and project manager.
All right, and then let's go online since they're sort of sitting next to us. Jean Marie?
Hi, excuse me, Jean Marie Katerina, counselor. I'm here in my role as chair of ordinance.
Okay, and then John?
Hi, I'm John Anderson, town councilor. I sit on the transportation committee where we talked about the impact fees, and I'm an alternate on the long range planning where these have also been discussed.
And he's our liaison for the Scarborough Economic Development
Yes,
Corporation.
and that too, among many things.
Drew?
Good morning. I'm Drew Olhowski, project manager with Haley Ward, in peer review for the town.
Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy St. Clair with St. Clair Associates. I am a civil engineer and consultant in the community.
Rick?
Good morning, Rick Cheney, SEDCO board member and attorney with Drummond Woodson at Portland.
All right, now we'll start back with the table here. Oh, I missed you. I'm sorry.
Drew Gagnon, civil engineer and project manager at Gold Palmer.
Mason Rowell, vice president pre-construction, Landry French.
Dan Bacon, development director for M&R Holdings, working on the Scarborough Downs project.
Adam Bird, Alpha Management, Oak Hill Holdings.
John Whitten, civil engineer with Haley Ward, representing we consult with developers and also a peer review for the town.
Angela Blanchett, town engineer.
Autumn Spare, I'm the planning director for the town.
Eric Higgins, to manage real estate.
Hello, good morning, Daniel Dickinson. I got a pending project in Scarborough, multiple business owner. Two brothers.
Kevin Freeman, with Landry French Construction, and have been with SEDCO for a long time.
Jake Michio, I'm with M&R Holdings, part of development, working on Scarborough Downs.
Hi, Art Ledoux, owner, KCV Trailer, Main Trailer Illustrations and Able Projects.
I'm Rocky Rispera, developer.
Good morning, I'm Selena Daniel. I am permanent project manager for M&R Holdings.
Excellent. Did I miss anybody else who was behind the chair that I didn't see? Good. And I do want to thank Landry French for giving us this lovely conference room for this morning's meeting, and all of the lovely snacks and coffee are provided by Landry's French as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. So let's give Angela the screen if we'll share.
I'm actually gonna start it.
Yeah.
So,
All right, we've coordinated this very well.
well, we decided this morning that it would be easier to go with impact fees. So we're gonna start with impact fees and then we'll talk about recreation impact, a little bit of background, recreation impact fees, and then the new proposed traffic impact fees. Have some discussion, take a little break, and then we'll come back and do environmental standards. So I think that'll work the best. So I'll go ahead and share my screen.
And Autumn, would you mind telling folks where each of these two pieces are? So there's been a public hearing on the
I
impact
will, it's
fees.
part of the presentation, yeah.
Right.
So the impact fee discussion, there's a little bit of background. I'll go into it for everyone's sake. This has been through, this came up, this has been going on for almost a year now with the council, but the state statute allows communities, cities and towns to collect impact fees. We can collect them for wastewater collection, water, solid waste, public safety, roads, traffic, and parks and open space and school facilities. What we have now, Scarborough has been imposing impact fees for over 30 years. We have a school impact fee, we have traffic impact fees. And so we've had these on the books for quite some time. We have what is called Chapter 415, and some of this is probably a little weedy for this discussion, but if you get into how the ordinance is actually laid out, this is relevant to that. But we have Chapter 415, those are our general provisions, and then we have separate chapters for each of our traffic impact districts, and then the school is in the general provisions. So part of this exercise and why I'm involved really is to help, because I'm the crazy person that really likes to write ordinances and consolidate things and clean up things a bit. So part of this exercise is to consolidate everything that we have into one easier to administer ordinance and to really lay it out. So everything has the same process, the same references. So on this slide, you'll see the green is sort of what's new and proposed. And so the new recreation impact fees, I'm going to talk about just briefly. We have a reservation section for open space. The town is doing a open space master plan right now, and we suspect that out of that, there may be a recommendation for implementing an open space impact fee. So just for ease down the road, there's a reserve chapter, but that is just blank at this point. And then section 5 is really about bringing in all of the roadway impact fees. We've moved all of the existing chapters into this one chapter, and Angela will go into more details in this, but several of the existing impact fees will actually be repealed if this is adopted, and that would be effective July 1. And then we have two new proposals for the Payne Road and Ginn Road intersection, and then Payne Road and the Nonsuch River, the bridge, and each with the corresponding sections of Payne Road for those. So the red is really just the weedy ordinance stuff that is what will be going away with this. So this is our process to date, like Karen mentioned. We started this in October with a council workshop. Then it went to ordinance committee earlier this year. We had a SEDCO board presentation, and then we went to transportation committee review. Town council has had a first reading, town council has had a public hearing, and we're here today with this. Town council does have a second reading scheduled for June 5th. The understanding is though that because we were trying to get this timing worked out beforehand, but I think depending on the comments and the input, town council would be, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they'd be comfortable tabling that second hearing if enough comes out of this conversation. We still have a little bit of time in June so that we could be in place July 1, even with an extension. So the recreation impact fees, the town has been collecting impact fees for recreation for some time, but there was actually not an ordinance that was in place. And so the proposal, the new ordinance is based on our Parks and Facilities Master Plan that was accepted by the council. And so it's a 10-year plan and it's an improvement, replacement. There's some operation or not operations, but some maintenance in there. And so the applicable cost that's been attributed for the recreation fee is just under $11 million. And it's based on the new project cost, expansion cost, and replacement projects. And in the back of this document, if you're interested, there's an actual very detailed spreadsheet. And what we've done is gone through and assigned each one to the type. And that's how we've come up with the numbers that we can attribute to this impact fee. So maintenance is not included because that's not allowed for state statute. So then we did some really fabulous things, and this involves the assistance of Karen Martin. Basically really taking our rate of growth ordinance, which allows an average of 261 units per year, and putting that out 10 years, looking at our population estimates, how our bedrooms are in line, how our units, putting some general assumptions based on unit type, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and so on. And what we came up with is 2 different costs that you would get $408 per bedroom or $415 per person. And the top line that I didn't mention, so that just under $11 million, the population increase over the next 10 years represents about 20% of our current population. So that's how much of that money we can attribute to new growth. The new growth obviously is not going to pay for all of the parks and maintenance master plan improvements. So the proposed fee is $400 per bedroom. This would apply for multifamily, single family across the board, but there is a not to exceed amount of $1,600 proposed. So that's the recreation impact fee. It's pretty straightforward, I think. If there are not any questions about that one, I'll turn it over to Angela to talk about the roadway impact fees.
Okay.
Okay.
So for traffic impact fees, we currently have a few districts in town, and I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with any development that goes through town paying those per trip for your development. What this ordinance change looks at is creating 2 new districts, as Anna mentioned, both on the Payne Road corridor, and trying to break that up as some traffic might peel off in different areas so that you're we're not overlapping in that area. So what also is included in this ordinance update would be the repeal of 3 of the districts in Payne Road section of the ordinance. Districts 1, 2, and 3 are all pending projects that the town is partnering with the Downs and DOT and putting that money that has been collected over the years towards actual real projects. So that was the intent of those traffic impact fees, is to be used to make those improvements. And DOT has definitely been pushing the town to actually invest those dollars back in. So with that, we looked at those 2 areas. I also mentioned in past presentations about looking towards the future, more areas that are of concern that need attention, and looking at potentially another area of impact fees. And again, there's some design work happening through partnerships with the Downs at Payne and Gorham Road, which seems like the most logical piece that will have a design and a cost associated with it. And we'll have to start a new conversation, most likely in 2025 on that. So this is just a real rude map of the area we're talking about. Exit 42. Just past the Holmes Road intersection is looking at that first district. That would include a traffic signal at Ginn Road where the arrow is pointing, as well as looking at the whole corridor as having a 4-lane section. Right now, we kind of weave in and out of 4 back to 2 lanes. And the capacity of that roadway is looking out is reaching its capacity. And so there's going to be a real need to improve this section. The next one, the pinch point, everyone talks about is really the Nonesuch River crossing. Right now, this is a 2-lane section, but then the shoulders narrow considerably as you kind of cross over. And so looking at, again, this section being a 4-lane section in order to accommodate the volumes of traffic that are being modeled for this area. And I just, as I noted, there's also the Payne at Gorham Road, which is not proposed at the moment, and that will be further conversations, probably starting next year. So then, little bit of weedy getting into the kind of the methodology. Essentially, how it breaks down is we looked at the existing traffic on these roads and the capacity and how much more traffic this has potential to hold as it sits today. And then we factor out the growth rates that we work with DOT to establish. They establish those over the next 10 years. We also factor in some of the growth rates in the region and what that through traffic is. So it's not just discounting that. I guess I just want to point that out. It actually is factoring in, that's how DOT calculates it also, is looking at if, again, as growth happens, how the region is affected and how this roadway is impacted by that. So then rerunning the two, you can really take the difference between the two and see what is the additional capacity of this roadway. And based on that, can give it a per trip estimate based on the design costs as well as construction costs. So obviously, development and construction is costly. And we're finding the numbers when you start looking at the actual improvements on this corridor. That's first section, what we're calling Payne Ginn, which is essentially exit 42 to Holmes Road, just past Holmes Road, is just under $10 million project cost. That's broken down by a trip fee, but I also, the third bullet, kind of looking at a 50% cost share, which I'll get into in a later date. We're trying to figure out ways to how we establish kind of a stakeholder and process as far as how do we all work together to try to accommodate the traffic that is going to be generated on this, and what portion and share everyone needs to contribute towards that. The next one, Payne at Nonesuch, is obviously the big one. That is a full replacement at the Nonesuch River. DOT has been reluctant to touch this without really having local development and the town really looking at this and ponying up quite a bit of money, because it's just too substantial in the needs that they have throughout the state to just tackle as their own. I was asked after the SEDCO meeting to really look at a couple of examples. So we took that feedback and wanted to look at some of the recent projects and kind of comparison for the current traffic impact fees opposed to the proposed. And I started with a few in the area, which was the Muzzy Road hotel that just got approval through planning board. That's closer to the South Portland line. That has, you can see the current and proposed numbers are significant change. And so we're breaking that down per unit for council as part of that process. So we've been taking feedback as we go and trying to provide whatever data is asked for and kind of moving that along. The other one is the AR Building apartment complex, which is at the corner of Gorham and Muzzy Road. That's the 126 unit. And looking at the costs per current and proposed. And the last one was actually out of the transportation committee, because Steve Berg actually was asking how, as you get away from the corridor, how does that impact? And actually their costs would have gone down based on really the impacts are going to be how much traffic your development is really contributing towards that Payne Road corridor. So obviously, as you kind of move away from that corridor, you're going to have less impact. And then what also is factored into that is that that last project actually has in their current fees, we're contributing to districts 1, 2, and 3, which now are 1 and 2, which now would be repealed. So that's where you see that difference. And then I also would just point out that the whole premise really of the traffic impact fees, it started so that really the last one in isn't paying this, $10 million or these huge numbers to kind of put in a whole new signal on their own, or to do these lane widenings. So it's really about trying to break that cost up so it's not all on one developer who happens to be the last one there. So I think regardless whether these are kind of moved forward or we kind of repeal them, there's a substantial cost with the offsite. So it's either we're paying it broken up between all the developers, or the developer themselves are kind of putting in those traffic signals or doing the lane widening. So this is just another method to get to the same spot. So I'm sure that I'd be anxious to hear a lot of comments from this group specifically on how that kind of can work or factor in, because I don't know if you're seeing from other communities how much offsite is costing throughout the region. So, and then going back to, we started with, here's the cost, here's the project, this is what it's going to cost. And then looking at what we got from feedback from different groups was, okay, how do you split up that cost and what is realistic way to look at it? And I just kind of put out some bullets here about the partnership approach and looking at how the future traffic volume can contribute. There's a lot of factors coming in, right? Beyond the new development, there's also just different changes in patterns, different things like that. We also, as I mentioned before, looking at DOT, they really want to do partnerships where we're coming to the table with 50% of the number or a large chunk. It makes it very desirable for them to kind of put a feather in their cap to say, see, we solved that problem. But putting in not the entire amount. So that's the goal, is trying to get to some sort of partnership that we can get state or federal funding through their processes. And then I also gave this example of the partnership, which I think has been successful, is looking at with the Downs. This is information that was presented to the council during a workshop at the beginning of the Downs project, looking at their total offsite costs, what the DOT was contributing, and what the town was contributing through this impact fees that have been collected. And so from those numbers, it came out as the developer paying 59%. And I was sure Rocky and Dan can contribute that the estimated costs are probably significantly higher than what you probably were at the 14 million to start with. So I'm sure that number 59% is low. That was what was provided at the time. So that's where looking at the new ordinance, the first proposal back for first reading to council started at a 50%. So again, looking at how can we find opportunities to partner and have a substantial enough amount of money to actually get projects done. Because what we found is, said these traffic impact fees have been in place for 30 years, and some of them have just sat because we just don't have the money to actually do a project. And so it's really important to be able to partner to make those dollars stretch further. And as Anam said, the next step would be council on June 5th. And I'm sure councilors are also probably anxious to hear any comments you have at that time or before the June 5th date.
Can you just, that last point you made about folks have been on they've been there for 30 years, but I didn't quite understand what you were
So
saying.
we started collecting impact fees in the 90s for traffic impact fees. And a lot of those accounts have just kept growing and growing and growing because it's, say, put in a $3 million traffic signal and we have, say, $1 million collected. So we're sitting on all these dollars that could be utilized. He is looking at us saying, you guys really need to pull the trigger and actually do projects. The problem is I don't have enough to do a complete project.
Okay.
So that's where partnerships
I
are
mean, a
gonna
project
be
like a
the
widening
key.
Project or a light project, what
Right.
projects like infrastructure improvements?
We've done that. Oak Hill is an example of, we've kind of nibbled around, but I think you'll see that it's hasn't made a substantial difference. You kind of, the projects, and that's why we're showing, here is the project. It's a traffic signal again. It's 4-lane sections. Those are a substantial cost that I can't do. I guess I could do little pieces of the corridor, but essentially over time that would cost more money. So that's the other piece, is trying to find that balance. Where are we going to spend considerably more by just kind of nibbling and doing little piece projects too?
Thank you.
I think to the point too, the fees 30 years ago were really low.
Yeah,
right?
that's
So
also-
it's not the right fee to,
And so you're getting fees one fee at a time for, yeah, okay.
So for a project that was estimated in 1990, for me to build it today, obviously it's not the same number.
Yeah.
So even to have developers then say, do their offsite improvements, say their direct impact, say, different turn lanes or something at an intersection. That would probably be a substantially larger cost than trying to share that with all the developers.
Other thoughts?
I have a pretty long list, but I don't want to jump right into the.
Go for it. This is a technical group.
I just, big picture, is there a plan? Because, you know, obviously that graphic you provided isn't what the cost would derive from, and we paid a fair amount of attention. I haven't seen too much information around what's exactly planned, other than 2 lanes to 4 lanes. There's a lot of other kind of implications, right, around right of way and when do you build it, and like decisions that may or may not have been made yet. So I'm curious about what the plan looks like and what public process said, yeah, we want that cross section for that price versus this other cross section. So that's the question.
So, well, can I answer
Sure.
that? Yeah, so we do have their preliminary plans that the cost estimates are based on. Those were presented through the transportation committee, and I think it sounds like it'd be helpful maybe to have on our website kind of this like a landing page where we could put, because there's a lot of information behind, to your point. There's plans, there's cost estimates, the engineer's estimates, there's the calculations, there are a lot of different things that got to this. A lot of the audience has been, like I said, council ordinance that probably didn't want to look at Drew and I's famous boring linear project. Like a road project is not fun to look at, so that's why it's not part of this, presentation. But it's totally available, and it might work to just like load it up on a website. I have no problem with doing that. All that information is definitely available.
Okay, yeah, so obviously influences cost, and if you say, yeah, we want a 4-lane section and a bike path is a different cost than 4-lane section, no shoulders, minimize wetlands, like.
So that was, those
that drive up that number or drop that number.
And those pieces, were discussed with the transportation committee about looking at, like you said, to your point, is bike and ped facilities. And that cross section, obviously starting with the DOT standard as far as shoulders and the travel ways and all of that. But there's definitely room to kind of change. And that was one of the things we talked about with the transportation committee, is that this is a concept or preliminary. And so to change, say, from a 8-foot multi-use path to a 5-foot sidewalk in the grand scheme of a $23 million project is not, it's a very small percentage. So like those kind of things, I don't think will have a substantial impact on the total cost. And also in that number, we're not including the construction cost increases or our bonding fees. So there's also some costs that also could be contributed that we're not at this point. So I feel like we could probably get some balance that I don't know is it necessarily making a huge difference.
Okay. And just to be clear about sort of the price tag, is it the
Yeah.
price tag for this year, or is it price tag for 10 years from now, 5%
10.
inflating?
It's 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's. Cause it seems like there's a substantial difference between today's price and a price from 10 years from now, so the
Yeah.
schedule would be to build it in 10 years, more or less?
I think realistically, yes, the plan would be to build it in 10 years. I think realistically, it would be 10 years us putting up as much money as we have and asking DOT to do a project with us realistically, because we're not gonna get to $23 million
Right.
in 10 years. That's not happening. Even at 100%, like not even the fact that we're reducing it by 50%.
Right. I think macro level, looking at the downs, it's front door of the downs, right? So
Yep.
we basically will get hit on every trip versus like
Yep.
an Oak Hill. Yeah, look, that's great, right? They're
Right.
not near the,
Right, yeah.
the impact fee changes. And looking at it, it's could be 2 to 4 times what's currently paid for by the project, even compared to even us making improvements. So figuring out a way for the corridor to get improved, some type of impact fee be in place, but also
Mhm.
for selfishly, for the project to continue, like it's a
So what if we
substantial
need that
change.
before the 10 years?
But if you need to
We need
improve,
that worked out.
oh, for your TMP or something,
How's that work?
well, then we would have, again, we'd start with the partnership to give you what we have, and then we would be able to say that project's done and we repeal it and start something out new.
Yeah, I think one of the things for us to understand is improvements in live, like it may be significantly cheaper just to do it. I don't say just, it's a component, but do a component of the project
Mhm.
in a timeline that works for the project and is actually economical compared to paying significant fees into a system that may or may not kind of execute on the plan. So that's one thing, is does the ordinance allow for a fee in lieu where you do, okay, a project, let's say it's just not the downs, a project is on one side of the street, and they run the numbers and say, we want to build, you know, one component of the project on our side of the street in the timeline that works for the project and not be subjected to these significant fees. That's just a question. Is it set up to do that? The old ordinances work, or you could do an improvement in lieu. So now I'm curious about the, the changes in terms of that ability, because it may be a lot more prudent for a project to do that versus.
I'll double check, Dan, but I think that still is in
Okay.
place, so
Yeah.
you can still go down that road, because I think that's a positive thing to get something.
Yeah,
built
just having
instead
a
of just paying
method
into it.
that makes it also work for the design,
Mhm.
not be a kind of a project that gets thrown away when the ultimate improvements later, so. That's just a question. And I think obviously the bridge is a huge component to this, and that's a lot more than creating new capacity for development. It's just a huge price tag that
Mhm.
I think it's pretty unreasonable for development to have to pay even 50% of, just given how significant that is. So thinking about, I don't know if that was discussed around how extraordinary that cost is for the development community to kind of bear, given it's really an existing deficiency, like it's.
But I think it's really
guardrails.
driven though by the volume. So right now, it's a 2-lane road, which is fine, but with development increases on that corridor, the volume increasing, a 4-lane section is where we're headed. So to that point, do you really want the downs to shoulder that whole thing on your own?
No.
Because you're gonna hit that capacity of that road because of this bottleneck. And so trying to figure out a way that at cost and does it in a shared way, I think is probably more critical for you guys than anything, to have something in place. Because realistically, you wouldn't be able to push that traffic through that 2-lane section.
Yeah, no, it's deficient today. you know, it's not meeting today's standards. in
Right,
terms
but
of
you're
too many
creating the
sections.
traffic numbers that would now trigger the need to expand that, though.
Are there any other funding sources trying to be found for that bridge replacement, whether it's FEMA or state that could assist with this? Is that? something
Yeah, so
that's-
that was where it started with conversation with DOT, and obviously that's where I was saying that for them and the needs throughout the entire state, because that's what I'm up against, right? The competition. And what this section of road and would mean. I really need to come to the table with some considerable match to get their attention and to have them replace it. If not, really, I mean, what we're looking at is just increased we're already seeing the congestion, obviously, on Payne Road, that it becomes this bottleneck.
Yeah, it feels low too, the bridge with the Such River. I was wondering if there was any leverage with that, with the rate
Flooding.
flooding, basically with FEMA or anything like that. That route has been, I don't know if that's been kind of thought about, or if that was something that the town could assist with and maybe burden a little bit more of the cost from grants or something like that, rather than developers as part. Because I think, to Dan's point, the bridge is really deficient today. I mean, yeah, it has 2 lanes barely, right? I mean, there's no shoulder on it.
Mhm.
So is there a portion that's like the bridge should be this with 2 lanes, and then there's another portion that, all right, what's the cost to get to 4 lanes, right? Some sort of, I guess, I'm just looking at it, it doesn't seem like the bridge is efficient today. And is that the developer's responsibility to fix the bridge? That doesn't feel like it's.
Well, I think what we found when we went through the conversation with DOT with the Downs TMP was that we weren't putting that it wasn't reached the capacity, the 2 lanes yet. I think that was the argument, right? So that we're actually not at a point where it's creating that congestion, and that was kind of some of the argument we heard from the Downs, right? So not to look at replacement or doing something there, and DOT agreed and said, we're not putting that on you guys because we haven't reached that capacity yet. I think what we're seeing, though, if you model it, we're gonna hit it eventually, and that's what we need to be proactive rather than reactive for the last developer in. Which maybe the Downs, it may be somebody else is gonna have to tackle something where you just can't push the traffic through that 2-lane section.
So Angela, what happens with, if the Gorham connector does get built and it pulls trips off of, and I don't know what extent it pulls trips off of Payne Road and others, how does that factor into assigning costs if the number of trips go down?
So, we have been in conversation with the MTA, has done models and studies, and we're not seeing a significant shift from the Payne Road corridor looking at the modeling for future development. So I don't know as it would have necessarily substantial impact to the trips.
Well, and I would say, like, best case, the cost would stay the same, but perhaps if you're a development, maybe some of your trips are attributed to the Gorham connector, and so you lose a
So you
few.
can
So-
show, yeah, that's
the,
true.
the impact study is gonna show, oh, maybe you're 3 trips less on the Payne Road corridor because of that connector in place. So you save a little bit of money. But I don't think it, to Angela's point, it would substantially change the other.
Just the bottom line is, just looking rough numbers, it's a major change in terms of cost. So that's, like, all these improvements are great if they can be afforded and development projects can continue. That's a major question mark, and obviously we're just receiving this and trying to digest, okay, how does that compare to what us or other projects pay now? Because it's not just obviously traffic fees, there's other fees being talked about, there could be additional districts coming online, and the ones that are going away, it's not like a trade out, you know, it's not like those were small fees, certainly in comparison to this, so it's
probably 4 times.
it's jarring, right?
Probably 4
It's
times the
jarring,
cost for
yeah.
us.
Right.
Right, and as to that point, I mean, we have in this year's CIP to contribute towards. So close out District 3 would be contributing towards the Muzzy Road, Payne Road intersection. We've been collecting those forever. And I'm sure you would attest that it's not a whole lot of money that I'm writing a check for towards that project. I mean, the cost of doing that has significantly changed. And to your point of districts 1 and 2, those are small impact fees. But to do the project, actually to add adapter through that whole system, we're giving you pennies, right, on the dollar. And because that's just not what it costs anymore.
Wait, so the question would be for town part would be. So it didn't work in terms of setting an impact fee, saving money and implementing it 10, 20 years down the line. It did work doing an improvement, I think, and paying down debt on that improvement potentially, like
Dunstan.
Or Higas, and that's like the question, or what's the balance on those? When do those go away,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So, because it's easier to establish an impact fee, I would think, and know the dollars you're spending, because you actually did the project, and then pay down that cost. Right now, we're projecting out, okay, what's inflation gonna be in 10 years? So the price tags. Well, I don't know what it is, Angela. Is it 12 million today and 23 in 10 years, or what the 2024 capacity, and have it up, but at least you executed and complete it, and maybe you're borrowing to do it. So it's something to think about, because I think 30 or 40% of that cost is inflation potentially. Which could obviously lower the impact fee costs.
That's the way to do it. Lowers everybody's cost and it gets done now. Today's dollars, today's project. What project? Low bond. Charges for it.
And regarding, and I always start, not a traffic engineer, nor do I want to be, but. So. There's a calculation for, vehicular capacity in it, like 1,700 and 3,300 or something for the two segments. That is the excess capacity post improvements over existing, correct? That's what that number is saying. It's not total capacity of the segment, it's.
Wait, say that again.
So. Not traffic engineer, yeah. So there's a capacity number that is basically divides it out, right, to get to the per fee trip.
The difference between improvements, yeah,
And there's a projected capacity of the segment
yes.
when it's complete. And the delta between the two is what these numbers are to get to the trip fee, correct?
Yes, subtracting out the growth in the area. So there's additional background traffic, let's say, that's going to be increasing. So that's already taken out of that. And so the difference is between existing, the background traffic growth, and then you get to the proposed. Yeah.
And I may have missed it in here, I apologize, but is there a way that we could see how that was calculated? The number fee is very dependent on that number.
Yeah.
Obviously, the cost is one thing, but the cost was broken down in the back here, so I think that's at least available. I was wondering if that could be posted or.
Yep. Definitely.
I do want to say, I know you're digesting some of this now. I'm going to be preparing a memo with all of our comments here. If you want to send me additional comments after this meeting, that's great. If I could get them maybe by midweek next week, that would be awesome. And I'll send a note out to the distribution list and you can just send the comments that way.
I would ask that you get them to her by Monday next week, so we can get them in front of council.
True.
Oh, go in their packet.
That's true. Thank you.
If I could speak for a minute, I really think the town needs to think about this process, because quite frankly, in my opinion, and I've lived here almost my whole life, this collecting fees to do work later has never worked. Doesn't work. So the town should do an overall traffic study, figure out what needs to get done, and everything they can put out to bid and get done, get it done, and then just charge us for That's how it's done in other parts of the country. That's why when you go to Florida, traffic's moving. Traffic's moving. Because the work's done. They just charge you for it. That's a cleaner way to do it. I think the numbers you're showing us are egregious. They're at least 4 times what we've been spending. But that's another whole bucket that to look into. But as far as, saving money to do it later. I mean, we're getting 2.8 million out of the town, and I'm thankful to have it. But it's less than a third of what it ought to be. I mean, it should have been way more. The town's got stuck with a lot of work. It wasn't us. And we accepted it. We got 3,000 trips and we're not there yet. I'm not sure what we're gonna do on the next round. Thinking that if there is some sort of an ordinance where we're writing checks, it's probably okay, but the numbers gotta work, otherwise it's not gonna get done. Nothing's gonna get done. I mean, those numbers we're floating numbers of a couple $1,000 a trip at the downs right now, and we've had end users not come because of it. So to look at the numbers that you're showing us, I don't know how that's gonna work.
Well, it's gonna be commercial if it gets hit, because like residential. People say the town's been growing fast residentially, but trips are low. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt a residential project, especially like a workforce housing or affordable project, but commercial economic development type projects are better for worse. They generate traffic. And since this is a SEDCO meeting, be aware that those are the types of projects that are gonna
Those are the types of
not
projects that
move
generate
forward,
tax revenue.
or, yeah. Those are the types of projects that will struggle with a double, triple, quadrupling of expected traffic fees. Because the nature of the project, they generate traffic. And it's by exit 42 is where the town wants to do economic development next to the highway. So transportation improvements are needed for commercial development to happen. It's expected. It's just it also just has to financially work or projects won't move forward.
Okay, shall we move on to the next phase here?
Sure. Rocky, I would just add, I don't think we disagree with the idea of doing it that way. I think that's a good conversation for council to have and to consider. I'm from Texas and we do things a whole lot different. You would be building your half of the road if you were required, right? So we may have 2 lanes built over here and nothing over there. So it's all about rough proportionality. And I think that's what we're actually trying to get to with the impact fees. So that, when you go in, Atlantic Credit Union is not putting in the whole 4-way light, you're doing your part. And we're trying to work within the means that we have, but I think that's a good conversation to have. I mean, that's a council
Look at that
decision.
growth zone. Know it's coming.
Sure.
Just do work. Just do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid, conversation to be had, so.
Oh, Don has his hand up.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna add, I don't know what I don't know, and I think I would like to be more educated on what other options could be in lieu of this that would be more efficient, economical, and really I think what we don't want to do with this is exactly what I heard, which is discourage the commercial development. I think everybody knows right now tax bills are going out, and one of the key things for Scarborough to kind of stay affordable is having more commercial growth. And I'm worried that if we do something here to try and build a road, it might have unforeseen consequences on what I think is really most important, which is really to kind of keep people in their homes and also bring more affordable homes to Scarborough. And it's not lost on me that whatever we do and these impact fees is ultimately gonna get passed down to future tenants, homeowners, businesses. So if there's a different approach that we can do that helps manage growth in a way that allows for these projects to happen, where it's not, collecting money for projects that may never happen. I mean, the state may never agree to do this. Well, I think we would hope they would. Collecting money for 10 years and then not getting them to participate is going to be a critical action that will need to happen if we want to make this work. And if it doesn't happen, then are we obligated to give the money back to the developers at that point in time that we collected? So again, these are all like, this is super, super complicated. But I'm totally open for other ways to do this better that make more sense. I just don't understand what those other ways are.
All right. You want to move on to environmental standards?
Yes.
So the draft environmental standards are coming from the Conservation Commission, and they're really coming from this comprehensive plan vision idea that Scarborough Marsh is our #1 asset, and we really have to do everything to protect it. So these standards that are proposed right now, this is the first blush from the Conservation Commission. So they've gone, really that they haven't been adjusted or changed or anything. So this, I would put this in context that this is the, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but the most extreme here. And I think the whole purpose of this process and ordinance committee sending us through this process is to come up with a compromise or some sort of middle ground that I think works for everyone. So this might be a little bit more painful of a conversation. I'm just putting that out there. So the proposed amendments, they have protections for all new developments. So if you require subdivision, they would apply, and if you require site plan, they would apply. This doesn't apply to existing single family or existing structures, but once you have something that comes in, they would apply. So there are definitions that have been added. The resource setbacks are included for wetlands, vernal pools, rivers, streams, and brooks. There's vegetative buffer requirements in addition to the overall setback. And then there's some permitted activities that are adjusted very similar to the way the shoreline zoning district works. There's a list of things that you can and cannot do. This is a more strict set of rules. And then there's a placeholder for potential waivers. And I think a lot of this conversation that we're having with the development community is to get ideas for what those might look like and how those might interact with the ordinance. So I'm going to go through each section very broadly and just explain what the requirements are proposed as. All of this is online under, you can go to our website and go to quick links or what's happening, and that'll take you, or you can go through the planning or the engineering department, and there's environmental standards, and you can see a lot of information and then an online map as well that you can get to these things. So vernal pools, the natural resource setback is 250 feet. And that's the proposal that you would have to basically stay away from the outside edge of the vernal pool. The vegetative buffer is also 250 feet. So if you have a significant vernal pool on your property, you're 250 feet away from it on all sides. So we had a recent project go through. DEP has this rule, but they will allow some.
I think 25%.
They'll allow some
get in.
encroachment into this, and so this would allow the town. The town would have a bigger standard, so we wouldn't necessarily allow encroachment unless there's something written into the waiver section. So we would be more stringent than the DEP rule. So this is vernal pools. The river, streams, and brooks, some of this would be covered in shoreline zoning, but the natural resource setback is 100 feet. And then the vegetative buffer is 75 feet proposed in this section. Wetlands, there's 3 different levels proposed. I think these are probably, I will just say that these are probably the most significant for this group to consider. There's a setback proposed for less than 1,000 square feet of 25 feet, and then 1,000 to 10,000 square feet, you're at 50 feet setback, and then greater than 10,000 is 100 feet. What's important to note too is these contiguous wetlands don't follow property lines. So if Karen has a property that is inundated with wetlands and I'm next to her, but she has greater than 10 acres and significant. And my property line is 5 feet from her wetland lines. I am responsible also for that 100-foot buffer. So I just want you to understand that that's how this is written and that's how it works, full transparency. And again, within each of these different setbacks, there's a specific list of things you can and cannot do. The marsh migration zone, this is really covered in resource protection. This particular change is going to have to be addressed in our shoreland zoning. So I don't think this one's going to be hugely significant for this group, but for purpose of conversation, it's been left in this environmental standards draft because it's easier to understand in this framework than shoreline zoning. But the natural resource setback is the highest astronomical tide plus 4 feet, or the highest astronomical tide plus 250 feet, whichever is greater. And then the vegetative buffer is the same. And so this allows for the marsh migration to move and not have that be built upon. So this is really just a snippet of the table to give you an idea of what can and cannot be done. So if you can picture at the top, the resource, so if that resource was the wetlands, the vegetative buffer is the thing that's the closest to the wetlands. And so it's more strict what you can and cannot do. And then the rest of the natural resource setback is outside of the vegetative buffer. So for instance, in the wetlands, you can't do fertilizer within that first really important group. Setback, but you can outside of that. So that's what this table represents. There's a very strict set of requirements adjacent to the buffer, adjacent to the resource, and then it gets a little bit more lenient. But that is what this ordinance covers as well.
And Autumn, we'll send the presentation out to everyone.
Yeah, I think this is online too.
Yeah.
So this is a map. This is just a snippet, but this is available online and when you go in, there's some disclaimers on it. We have to put, to classify something as undeveloped, we put, if there's less than $25,000 value for structure, we just pulled it into GIS. So if you go into this map online, you can zoom in to anything you want to know about specifically and kind of play around and turn on the layers. But you can see how if you would be affected by the wetland buffer, the vernal pool buffer and so on. It's not, I will say that if you go in, it's just going to pick up the whole parcel. It's not going to show you exactly what piece of it. So just be aware of that. But it is a really good tool that I think gives you an idea of how properties might be affected. So this is just the same as we showed you for impact fees. This is the process that this has been going through. This started last summer with the Conservation Commission, stayed with them for quite some time. And then again, we presented this to Karen's SEDCO board. The ordinance committee reviewed it in April. They didn't really have any other comments other than go forth and collect comments and do more engagement. And so that's why we're here. We will go back to ordinance committee after this and after comments are collected. And so the rest of the process is really to be determined after this input and then how we get back. So with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion.
Autumn,
Yes.
Autumn, as chair of ordinance, I wanted to add that, speaking for myself only and not for the committee, I have several concerns with, some of what's in this ordinance because it is more strict than what the state ordinances are in many places. And I'll be blunt, I'm not in no rush to put it back through ordinance until it's been thoroughly vetted. So just know that, but we really need feedback from people who will be affected by this. So
I'll second that. I don't want to see it at the council until it's been thoroughly vetted as
thoroughly
well.
vetted. Yep.
I guess just as a point of clarification for the vernal pool. So the 250-foot setback, is that for all pools or is that just for significant? Cause I heard both language being thrown around.
Yeah, I did that on accident. It's for all vernal pools, the way it's written. And so again, another great point for perhaps a waiver.
Well, or could the definition just match the state? Maybe the easier way to do it, so that it's not conflicting and.
That would make too much sense, please.
I got kind of a fundamental question. Why does the town of Scarborough think we need to be more restrictive than the state and the federal government? What's driving that?
Well,
We want to stop all development in town? Is that it's the only thing I can think of, except that there's no other reason.
well, I know Anna can speak to, I think, where it's coming from Conservation Commission, but I think from a bigger point, can't see around the chair. From a higher level, I can say I've been a part of and I think some others in this group have been on the Chapter 500 updates, which is the statewide stormwater. They're also looking at setbacks with, on the technical group, we're looking at wetlands, setbacks and things like that. The problem is the state, from DEP's point of view, they're trying to regulate from a statewide standpoint. And so their example they keep giving us, and I'm saying us as our MS4 communities, that's there's 32 in the state, right? That's Greater Portland, Greater Bangor, Lewiston, Auburn, is that what we keep hearing is Brooks, Maine is getting a Dollar Tree. They're not getting anything else for another 10, 20 years. So does it make sense for them to have these ratcheted down environmental standards? Not necessarily, because it's the cumulative impact. Whereas in a developed communities like Scarborough, Portland, they're asking us specifically to do more locally. They're putting it back on the municipalities, saying, you guys need to look at the tributaries and maybe do more buffers around those that we're not going to do because it doesn't make sense in Brooks and it doesn't make sense in Dover Foxcroft. So that's what they're actually pushing back on the municipality to start looking at these things. And I think what you're going to see coming out of the new updates is more of a tiered approach. It's going to be, if you're in Aroostook County, you're doing something different than you're doing in Kittery.
That's horrifying.
But that's what's being pushed at the municipality. And so on top of that, as a separate parallel path, you're also getting the conservation commissions looking at our comp plan and really the drive, I think, to protect the marsh specifically, and then other important natural resources. So you have the two kind of merging, I would say.
I get that, but I mean, if you look at our comp plan.
Yeah.
You got competing interests going here. You got a growth zone. In our comp plan. And now you're gonna change that. I mean, you might as well throw zoning out the window. Everything you're gonna do is gonna get driven off when you have wetlands. We're in Scotland. We have wetlands. I can think in 40 years, I've got one piece of land that only had 1,800 square feet of wetlands that I developed. Everything else is way more than that. I mean, Scarborough would be probably not developed if these rules are in place. I just don't even see how anybody could think that this was fair. I don't see how anybody could think this is anything but a land taking. By the town of Scarborough. I just.
Without any thought around economic impact.
Correct. That's
and growth.
Oh.
Angela, I have a parcel on Scottle Hill Road. It's 27 acres, and based on these rules, it's rendered useless. I will not be able to build a house based on these proposed ordinances.
These are fair and understood concerns, and I will say that these concerns were expressed during the conversations with Conservation Commission. That's why I preface this, that this is where we are and this is where this came from. I think it's to your point, Rocky, I mean, the zoning and the growth ordinance, it all has to be considered. I think you heard from our counselors too, that it's not ready to go anywhere. This is just part of the discussion that has to happen. And I think this is the feedback that the council needs to hear and staff needs to hear, so we can see if there's some things. I will say, when Angela and I sort of started this, we were hoping for some setbacks. So when you are putting a fence up against the wetlands, we have room for you to actually stand to build it. I mean, seriously, that's right now, we don't have anything. So if you have a wetland line and you're gonna build a wall on it, you have to stand above it without affecting the wetlands. So we're looking for some really reasonable, I think, setbacks.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal today, is to get feedback to try to balance, right? So we have an extreme. I think she
Mhm.
started the conversation with, right now, here's an extreme. And I know there's also zero. And my goal would be to get to something reasonable, because what we're seeing more and more is, you're right, there's a lot of wetlands in Scarborough. So everyone's building up to a line that is drawn on a 2D plan. And what we're seeing is there's impacts to the wetland, whether it's permitted or not. You're building right up to it, you're impacting that wetland. So that's where the vegetated piece comes in. And I think that's where we're looking at. There's 15 feet of vegetation before you're buffered. That's huge when you have a development with parking lot or even landscape area where you're putting where you have manicured lawns and things like that. To have any kind of buffer is going to help improve the health of that wetland. And I think that's what we're trying to get to. And to Autumn's point is, the construction, we need to give us some breathing room to constructing up to a line, because it's not working.
What measure says it's not working?
Out in the field, going out in the field at construction sites and seeing that line getting crossed. Also,
That's a problem, but.
yeah,
breaking the
wetlands.
existing rule.
And then it's about cleaning up those wetlands. So you're getting back to kind of mitigating kind of impacts that shouldn't have been happening with the permitting, but it's also just the constructability. And that's what we talk about in planning board is, you can draw anything on a plan. Can you actually construct it? And I think that's the piece I'm trying to, when we're getting so dense, our development, that if you're off by 3 inches, you're out in the field grading into a wetland. So that's where I'm like, I need to give us some breathing room a little bit. And so that's where we're trying to get something reasonable.
Well, it sounds like we're trying to mitigate the folks that cheat the 3 inches versus.
Well, I'm not saying that it's intentional. I'm saying there's errors in the survey. There's a whole host of reasons. The sewer's in the wrong place. There's lots of reasons. So I'm not saying, and it's all intentional. I'm definitely not. I'm saying it's just life. It's a factor. Any construction site, you try to follow a plan. It's not going to be perfect. You got to work with what you have out in the field. And I think that's the challenge when you have no wiggle room. You're never going to have the perfect design to actually implement on the site.
It would just seem that the depth of the punishment doesn't fit the crime.
And that's what I'm saying, this extreme, but I'm asking for what is logical in order to give us that breathing room.
I want to
That's
go
what
to
I'm
John just for a second. John, you had your hand up.
I think Angela kind of hit on what I was going to say, which was like, I think what's being proposed right now, at least my personal opinion, is that it's, somewhat of an extreme view for people who very much value and put conservation first. And so I get that, I understand that, and I appreciate it. But conceptually, I also agree that we need to do a little bit more. And so what is that reasonable first step that would make sense? And I think, that's what I'm hoping to hear from this group is, if what's happening today isn't quite working, what's a reasonable step to make it better? Because as Rocky said, our comp plan is mired with conflicts. And I think what we're trying to do and what the town's trying to do is to find the right balance that moves everything forward as best as we can, including conservation, which is a key focus and goal of the council. So again, I'm just really interested in maybe less so what's in front of you and what was proposed, but like, what is that right first step that we could take that would be reasonable?
I'm sorry to jump in here, but I'm gonna, I agree with what John said. part of me in my head here is, should we have some sort of a working group that takes this, which I see as an aspirational ordinance, and has membership from the different parties affected, and see what they can come up with. Again, I don't see a huge rush in this, other than I'm definitely one who believes in, conserving natural resources and making sure we protect our environment and whatever. But we have to weigh that against, the private property rights and people's ability to do with their property what they can without undue regulations, and can you believe I'm saying this? Undue regulations and whatever on the owner. But come up with a good balance that's a healthy balance. And the only way I could see this happening, and my concern is, I don't want this bounced right back to ordinance, because I don't want it yet. It's not ready for prime time. And so I would like to suggest some sort of a working group, but that's where I'm at.
Any volunteers? I don't usually have snacks, so.
I'll provide some.
Just I guess a few ideas or points. If it's, Angela, I can understand the concern of sometimes a lot of different things are happening, and us as designers, we develop right up to the wetland line because we have to meet parking lot standards, and there's certain things that really push us to that. And, but I can understand that, if you're a couple feet.
I'm gonna stop you there, because you can always make the building smaller. So you can go down that path, Drew, but you can always make the building smaller. So let's just put that clear.
But if the project doesn't pencil with a smaller building, how do we do it?
Well,
But all sites aren't.
but they're all not created equal. And I think if you know, when you go in to design a project, you look at the bare minimum rules that you've got to comply with. And let's be honest, I mean, I've worked on the other side. This is the box I can work in. So if you have a 15-foot wetland vegetative buffer to work at, you decrease your box and you see what pencils in there. So I just wanted to be I want to be really clear that you can't just have your big building and all your parking and say, well, we're right up so we can get it. There are ways, and that's what we're trying to get to this rule. So, because I think that's the easiest way to design a project, you know exactly what the rules are. And the way Scarborough is now, sometimes the rules kind of bending and change, right? And you know that's true. So if we define it, and that's the whole purpose of this, is to get to a place that the development community and the town are comfortable with, and it's predictable, and it's known, and it's straightforward. And that way, when you're designing that parking lot, you know how much space you need.
Totally understand. And so what I was going with was, if it sounds like there are some construction issues that it's so tolerant based on that, would like something like a 5 or 10 foot no disturb buffer be something a little bit more appropriate than 100 feet, right?
Or 250.
Or 250. So again, just kind of throwing that out there, as there could be some calculation you have within 100-foot wetland setback that you could do for the project wide, because again, a lot of times these sites we design on, there's never a straight wetland line along the back. That's it's usually the jagged little wetland finger that you're trying to avoid, that really frankly screws everything up for the site. And if you can't disturb within so close 100 feet from that wetland, then the whole site just becomes useless because of one wetland finger. So if you could, again, protect most of the wetland, which is reasonable, but you're impacting, up to 10 feet of the wetland finger that everyone's trying to avoid, something like that would still would still allow development, but it would do better. It's better for the resource, right? So at the end of the day, we're kind of trying to meet in the middle somewhere. So just some sort of idea with that. I did want to mention another, as I read these standards, just to kind of get people thinking about it. I think about this stuff in the technical and like, how does it actually affect the site? So the stormwater conveyance is permitted within the first, 20-25 feet of a natural resource setback, but not within a vegetated setback. So in Maine, it's very difficult to do infiltration in Maine from a stormwater perspective. It's kind of not like any of the other 49 states, to be honest. We're very behind in that regard as far as the standards, which means we have to put these filter sections in, and we have to convey the flow out to an outfall or somewhere to kind of make all the grades work. So what I'm getting at is that really, we start with a section that we for development that is deep, I'll call it, the depth is deep. And that drives grades up already, right? So that we're already starting in a spot that, okay, grades on site need to be higher than in other parts of the country, just for that simple fact. So one way we try to do that to make development reasonable is outfall at the lowest point of the site. And if we're held to a 75-foot or something setback, where that's the lowest point on the site, even though there's a ton of room on site, even after, say, like 100-foot wetland setback, it may not be feasible to lift the site up 8 feet of fill from either geotechnical challenges or just the sheer cost of it, because now we can't outlet closer to a stream because of basically a line just drawn somewhere in the sand. So we basically have to get lucky where there's an existing ditch that's not called a stream outside the 75 feet to be able to outlet something. So I look at there needs to be at least a minimum in my mind, some sort of something that can be waived, where you can get, if you can't, the only way to make the site work is to outlet closer to a resource. That, I think that has to be in there, or else Scarborough is very flat in general. And it's very difficult to make grades work on that, and I'm concerned that that will really prohibit a lot of development from being able to move forward just based on site grades. If there's a hard 75-foot line from an outfall
I'm just
perspective.
gonna keep driving the site up.
Yes.
So just from an environmental standpoint, what you're describing also though, is that you need access to get down there to maintain that plunge pool or level lip or whatnot. So you're not just impacting a little circle 25 feet from a stream, you're actually have an access route for a truck or somebody to get down in there. So it's a little more impactful. But I totally hear and appreciate what you're saying. I will also mention that from what I'm hearing from counselors, it's talking about this being maybe a slower path, that you might see the significant changes coming as far as you're talking about infiltration and DEP looking at groundwater recharge is the new kind of basis. And also low impact development. So you're really looking at, they're really pushing for you to infiltrate all over the site in many pockets, rather than build your site high and drain to one pond is, I think, gonna be in the past. And so to your point, I get your challenges today. So I also don't wanna create an ordinance that then is gonna be outdated in the near future.
Nancy has her hand up. Nancy?
Hi, just wanted to kind of chime in on a few different things. I've been doing engineering for quite a few years now, and I've seen the evolution of environmental standards at the state and federal level and at the local level as well. And to your points, Autumn and Angela, I certainly understand the constructability if you're drawing right up to the edge of a wetland limit and you're proposing fill or you're proposing the construction of a fence within those limits. I do see that in the ordinance, the draft ordinance, there is a 5-foot distance required for construction of a fence in order to protect that wetland. And I can understand that demarcation of the wetland limits in the field during construction is a valid point as well. And I think in some cases that's been done in projects throughout the community already. The concern that I see with this large setback and buffering requirement is the impact that it has overall in the community. If you just simply look at that GIS map, there is a tremendous amount of red. Those are the properties that are affected by this ordinance. There is way more red than there is green, and that truly does have an impact on development. And the biggest question that I do have is, what is the intent of that 100-foot buffer setback requirement, in that we already have state level standards through Chapter 500 that require treatment of our stormwater. We are required to provide for erosion and sediment control, all to protect the natural resources that are in the community already. Those standards, although they may be changing, Angela, and I'm not privy to the new standards that are coming out, at a state and federal level, we are forced to comply with those ordinances with the intent of protecting the natural resources. The standards that are being set forth in this proposed ordinance go far and above what those standards are. So truly, what additional benefits are they providing to the resource itself? We have to deal with protection for thermal impacts. We have to deal with recharge into the groundwater, those types of things already. So I truly believe that this is a huge impact. And I truly believe that if we just simply get to the reality of what is driving this need, there's got to be a better compromise for this. The other question that I do have is, well, two. One is a comment. I think it's imperative that if this ordinance does move forward in any fashion, that there are provisions for the planning board to look at the specifics of a project and a site in particular. Because without any waiver alternatives, there are certain conditions where these requirements would not apply. I can think of 2 properties right now that have previously permitted wetland fills, that if this new ordinance were to come into place and they required to move forward with the site plan review, that would be an impact. But those are already permitted. They've been paid for and compensated at the state and federal level. So how do these standards come into play when you're dealing with a site plan that's already had some degree and level of review? There's no reference to it in any of this language. And the other comment and question that I have is, where are these coming from? Are they just simply something that it's always good to be conservative? It's always good to, protect the environment, but we do have to strike a balance between what is going to be good for the community and what we're already doing. Are there means to make it slightly better, but not at the impact to the broader community?
Thanks, Nancy. I think your point about the planning board having waiver opportunity, that's important. And I think I put that out there in the beginning, that that's part of this discussion, is to figure out what that is. And then these, as written, are coming from the Conservation Commission and their role in the community and their priorities. So again, that's why coming to you all, it's the goal of this is to come up with a compromise, a common ground that we think is reasonable on all sides to achieve the goal. So.
Yeah, I would just second that with Nancy's comment, like alignment with the comp plan. There's a lot of competing interests here. And the forested wetland is not the Scarborough Marsh. So like Scarborough's 20 to 30% forested wetlands. In the growth area, what's the highest priority? And like, what's that balance? And I think that's where the council really needs to provide direction, because you have a SEDCO committee, you have a housing committee, you have a lot of committees.
There's a lot of committees.
That are looking at very different things or don't understand the need for, I mean, Angela, you mentioned density. I mean, that's what we're being asked to do. And it does matter whether it's a 10-foot setback or a 100-foot setback. It could be the matter of the project even being viable. So we need to figure out, or the council needs to figure out, okay, what are the highest priorities and how do you align all the other zoning expectations with a fairly broad, unnuanced kind of proposal. This suggests forested wetland has a greater setback than, in some cases, Scarborough Marsh. So that's a pretty extreme kind of position at this point.
And Dan, you bring up a good point. You know, how we address the rate of growth ordinance. We used to have this very broad, this is how it works with a few tweaks, and then we broke it out because we do have a growth area and we have different areas. And so maybe these standards, we need to consider that. And so maybe there's a different set of standards. Maybe there's a minimum that gets us to a certain point for constructability. and protecting the resource, but maybe there's a minimum as you move throughout the community. And that's part of this discussion that can be had. I think that's fair because our comp plan does say we want growth really on the wrong side of the turnpike. I mean, it's, you know, if we were flip-flopped, it'd be great. It'd be a different conversation. I think it'd be easier. But that's one way we could approach it too. And I like Jean Marie's idea about a working group and more discussion and
Just impacts too, it suggests, I mean, if you can't get within 100 feet, it means you can't impact the wetland, right?
Sure.
But, I mean, DEP and Army Corps, there are obviously provisions for that, and projects need to do that to be viable, so wherever this goes, I don't really think there should be a waiver, because that suggests there's choices, but there's projects that just can't happen if you're not allowed to impact, you can't even get to the upland, so there clearly needs to be a provision, probably in any zone, for impacts to enable projects to move forward. DEP and Army Corps are no walk in the park. So there's already plenty of rigor for projects to demonstrate alternatives and explain why they need to impact wetlands to begin with. So and I'm not sure how educated, obviously, the Conservation Commission is, you know, like they're working on this in their kind of space, and I'm sure you're representing some of that, but understanding the rules that are in place already, because Nancy would attest, and everybody else around the table, like there's plenty of processes in place to do a lot of what I think is being suggested here. So.
I still don't have any volunteers for my working group.
Oh, they're all volunteering.
And I guess the other piece that, as we talk through it, and maybe this is for the working group to kind of tackle, is to look at maybe not in addition to kind of these buffers or setbacks, is kind of the criteria around it. I mean, right now we've broken out wetlands is less than 1,000 to 10,000 square feet or greater than 10,000. What we talk about a lot is like an acre of wetlands or 3 acre. I mean, there's some large contiguous wetlands that I feel like, to your point, Dan, is like, is this little isolated forest wetland the same value as the marsh or 20 acre wetland is obviously a bigger habitat. I mean, it's a bigger value, a higher value, those type of things. So maybe it's more about kind of also better defining what we're looking at for those setbacks to apply to. So I think that should be another kind of bullet for the working group, is to look at not only those distances, but also the definition of those, where we want those to tie to. Because I think that is room for conversation.
Looks like Jean Marie has her hand up over there.
Yeah, thanks. Again, I'm happy to hear you come back to the working group. And while I'm sitting here and I'm listening to all of the developers, and I noted most of you have civil engineering backgrounds, which I do not, no way. And nor do you want me to have a civil engineering background. But that being said, it's going to be a process to get from, you know, where we are now to something that's going to make sense for all parties. So a working group, I think, makes tons of sense. I would be very interested in thoughts on the composition of a working group, and the timeline for a working group. So that I don't mind working with Autumn or whomever to bring the concept of this working group forward to the council. So that the Conservation Commission and those folks don't think that we're just, you know, we're just trying to jam it up and not go anywhere with it, because that's not fair either, because they put a lot of work into this. But we need to come to some agreement on what makes sense to meet the needs of all the different parties involved, and make sure we're maintaining, you know, the integrity of the Scarborough Marsh and our natural resources. So I'm happy to, you know, work together with Autumn or whomever on who should be on the working group, but I really would like here's what I want. Let me get around to that. I would like some memo or letter coming from this SEDCO group expressing that you would like to see a working group established and with some thoughts on what it is, and send it to the ordinance committee, since it's still an ordinance, so that we can then do something with it. Does that make sense, John? I'm looking at John Anderson.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I think I would love to see the Conservation Commission with some developers, with some homeowners,
Yes.
with, you know, other interested parties come together and compromise on something that everybody can live with. That, again, we've been doing that a lot lately. Like, everybody's unhappy, right? And that sucks sometimes, but that's really probably the best solution when we get to that point. So I'm hoping that across the board, different stakeholders can get together and come up with something that considers all of our goals as a community and then hopefully moves us forward.
Yep. Thank you. That's all I've got.
All right, so what's the temperature of the room right now in terms of the concept of the working group? And it seems to me that there's two stages of the working group, because these folks, sort of to your point, that there's a lot of technical knowledge here, the experience of working through the regulations and understanding, you know, really the nature of wetlands and what exists in current ordinance and state requirements. So does there need to be a pre-working group that maybe comes from a more technical standpoint and then goes out to a larger group to work that out? You guys tell me.
I don't understand what a pre-working group is.
Yeah,
I would like to offer to facilitate, because I'm not an engineer, I'm a planner, and I've been working with the conservation group, so I'd like to offer myself up as a facilitator.
Yep.
Of technical and developers and conservation, and then I think.
I think, I mean, one thing that, you know, first thing I did when I came in was read this letter that's here, and I think some of the questions that immediately came from some of the developers here is I think they're honestly, I mean, it's almost like, I think there needs to be some effort made to educate the reasons for this. I mean, it seems to me that there are some people who just don't understand where it's coming from. And I do get that a lot of work's been put in by the Conservation Committee, and that there, you know, it appears there may be projects that are crossing boundaries, et cetera, but I don't really think that's widely understood. And I think in order to get any sort of buy-in from developers or whatever, this sort of just needs to be explained, or else it's going to be a very one-sided working group, I think.
I feel the same way. I mean, I'm shocked that this has moved as far forward as it has. This is a group that obviously has an agenda. There's no one else in the group that understands what those impacts are, other than probably you, Autumn. You've been involved, but it's frankly, I'm insulted by the whole thing, and I'm shocked that it's gone this far. And I'm not going to volunteer to be on that group, because I will not be constructive. You don't volunteer, Nancy. You don't volunteer.
Thank you, Rob.
But that's sort of my point. I mean, I
Said, hey, wait a minute, guys, that's like totally outrageous. Let's get reasonable here. I shouldn't say no one, because probably you.
I will say I do too. We are trying to, yes, trying to.
I want you to understand that. Angela, I mean, it's coming from an environmental standpoint. She's an engineer. She's got stormwater requirement. I'm a planner. We're not total developers can do whatever. But you have to understand, we've had these conversations with the commission. So maybe the pre-meeting is a meeting where we all outline.
Council ought to throw it right back, and I would say, come back with something reasonable.
Yeah.
I think it also though is, I think it does make sense to get a few at the table. So it's not us staff saying, okay, this is gonna get feedback. And them saying, why would anyone oppose this? So we have to go through that piece, right? And so I think it's better to have hopefully a constructive conversation to kind of see that we need to find a balance, and I think we were trying to get there. And I think it would be beneficial to kind of have all the stakeholders kind of at least having a open conversation. And to the point we keep coming back to is, where did this stem from? I guess I go back to my original point. This is coming from multiple directions. It's, yes, Conservation Commission, and wanting to preserve and protect. I mean, it started with the 30 by 30 and our open space. This is an engine that's been moving, right? And the train is going. And so they're kind of looking at how else can we protect our resources, right? So that's where that part of that stemming from. The other piece is, again, I say, we're continually getting pushback from DEP to locally, you guys need to improve your ordinances and ratchet down, because at the state level, we're looking too broad and they're pointing at us and enforcement and ordinances, and there's a lot of pressure on that. So that's where it's coming from. And to your point, then really that education has not been out there, right? To say, here's all the factors and how are we gonna address that? Okay, let's look at ordinance, right? So it might be looked at as working in a vacuum, and we're trying to just throw open the doors. Here it is. Let's hash it out. Let's rip it apart.
What kind of, I'm just gonna, one last, what kind of, power does the state have over municipalities in this sense? Like, I know like with revaluations, if you don't revalue every 10 years, there's consequences, there's things like that. If the state is putting pressure on a town like Scarborough to change its ordinances, what sort of responsibility do we have for that? What kind of leverage power do they have over us?
They don't necessarily have leverage and power over that specifically, but we are an MS4 community, so I annually report to them. So we annually get feedback on doing more and more and more. And so, again, there's 32 municipalities that are probably getting the similar feedback.
What's
Hundreds. Huh?
What's the punishment down Scarborough when you tell them, no?
We get audited, and we get audited by EPA or DEP and can have substantial fines if we're not a responding.
We're not following the current standards.
Well, it gets into the gray area between our permit and what they would like to see. And so, yes, it gets complicated and it puts us at risk. Let's just say that. It puts us at risk for fines from DEP or EPA, most likely EPA.
John did have his hand up here. John?
No, yeah, I was just saying, if there is like a pre-working group meeting or a couple of people from this group, maybe some Conservation Commission people and staff, like to me, what I feel like we've kind of, what I'm hearing is like the problem statement for what we're trying to do is not clearly articulated. And then what are the success criteria through which we would come up with a solution together that considers those different wants, needs, perspectives. So I think what we got is a very specific problem statement or focus from a group who has a piece of that. But I think that's, in my mind, what this working group or sub-working group, whatever we want to call it, needs to do is let's get alignment on the problem statement. Let's align on what success looks like, and then let's figure out what the right solution is. And it may not be anything that was proposed today. It might look very, very different. But really the objective is, in my mind, we want to conserve more of our great natural resources in our community, but we also want to grow, and we also, want to respect people's property rights. And so what is the solution, or is there a solution? And maybe there is no solution and we just keep doing what we're doing. But again, I think those conversations need to happen, and it starts with a clear problem statement in my mind.
Isn't that what we've been doing though? I mean, with all the restrictions that are in place today when it comes to conservation versus development, isn't that what we've been doing? Haven't we been conserving our resources? Haven't we worked towards that? Haven't we come up with balances that work for both parties? We've been doing that.
I would say probably from the Conservation Commission's perspective.
The house is on fire, and I mean, it's just, to Rocky's point, it's like, it feels like the Civil War. You have the North and the South, and they're never gonna agree.
I would think that, and I love what Nancy said about, you're already complying to federal and state regulations, to oversight. And I'd be interested to hear what the other 31 communities across the state that are potentially being pressured by DEP, how are they responding? What are their plans?
Well, I guess you're seeing higher environmental standards in South Portland. You're seeing stormwater fees in Portland. So, and what DEP has provided to us in our working group is showing percentage wise and those development communities and looking at really, like to your point, the wetland impacts and across the state and the developed square footage. Scarborough is like third. We're high up there, and so we are on the radar. And so that's where the other communities are kind of looking at, okay, we're implementing these other things. What makes sense for Scarborough is, I think other communities are doing reactive work, right? So they're saying, we're gonna collect stormwater fees and we're gonna fix all the problems and sins of the past. And I think we're taking a different approach and looking at it proactively. Can we get to a spot that's a 15-25 foot buffer and be proactive? So we're not in a place of Portland or South Portland or Long Creek watershed where we're just reacting and not making any kind of progress to fix things. You know what I mean? I think that's, if we can look at it that way, I think it would be helpful. And I'm not saying that, to the point, it sounds like, I think we could make progress getting everyone to the table. I know we're kind of depicting it as, well, we've tried, that this is kind of the starting point for them, for Conservation Commission. But I really think if they're hearing other voices, they might also, it would be just helpful, I think, for them to hear this. And I think there could be some movement. I just think they just don't know what they don't know. And so I think they need to hear that and see it. And I think that there could be progress.
So Angela, it sounds like there's room for, at a minimum, like a white paper format that sort of lays out, here's what happens now, in a way that all of us who are not engineers can understand. Here's what's happening now. Here's what the current regulations are. Here's where we are. Here's what the MS4 does, sort of laying it out. And that's why I was thinking of a little bit of a pre-meeting with these guys who can help flush out what is it that we need to know. And part of that is bringing to the table some examples of how that does affect different properties, certainly within our growth areas. So that's what I was thinking about with doing a little bit of pre-work before you get to a table that really then is Conservation Commission members and property owners and things like that, who can then sort of flush out that compromise. But it seems like there's not this universal platform that everybody understands what's happening. And maybe that's not true, but it seems like there's room for somebody to lay out what the situation is. And a little bit to John's point as well.
I agree with that approach. Because this is why when it came from ordinance, and it's like, to be honest with you, I was getting some pressure. Let's get this passed. Let's get it up to town council. And I was like, yeah, wait, whoa. So yeah, anything you guys can come up with, that will be, useful, would be helpful to me as chair of ordinance and would be helpful to us as a town council. Remember, any committee just makes suggestions to the town council. It's ultimately up to the council as to what happens. So it's really the council that needs to be educated in the long run. So any work we can do to educate the council so that they're reasonable on something like this is helpful.
And I think to Dan's point, he made a comment a while back about education for the Conservation Commission. I mean, if you think about it, if SEDCO or put together some sort of proposal for economic development, would probably horrify the Conservation Commission, but that's what we know. That's how we're approaching it. They may have put this together without without knowing what its impact is going to be.
Well, they didn't. It's egregious.
Well, but again, from their mission standpoint, that's their mission, you know, so I don't, it's not, may not be personal, is what I'm saying. So education saying, look, we know what you're trying to accomplish, however, in the real world, it's gonna have these impacts. It's good for them to hear that too, the way it's good for us to hear what things might be able to get fixed.
I agree, John. And the thing that would be productive for the working group is like a directive, because I don't want to be part of a working group where it's Conservation Commission versus
Right.
developers.
Yeah.
And everybody's pointing at the comp plan and picking out their chapter that they
Exactly.
like. That's not aligned. So I think the council, and I don't want Autumn personally to have to facilitate that on her own without ground rules. Like, I think the council needs to say, this is what we expect out of the working group. These are all these goals, because I have no disrespect to DEP, but there's a housing group at the state level that wants housing. And they don't necessarily care about 100-foot buffer or, so there's state level, the same type of silos where there's plenty of directives from all levels, economic development, housing, alternative transportation, all these things. We're picking one out of the 10. So I think there needs to be, for the working group to be a collaborative process. We all need to know what the end expectation is from the council who's going to receive something, because I think otherwise it's going to be one side versus the other.
Yeah.
So,
And the one thing I want to also throw out there to Dan's point that I'm just thinking about on this topic is like, we've got a lot of stuff happening right now in town, a lot of stuff with conservation already happening. Like, let's think about priority here too, in terms of how quickly this needs to move. I understand that the Conservation Commission has worked on it for a long time, but as far as I'm concerned, this is not a top priority, and I wouldn't want it to appear as a top priority. So I don't see a rush, as Jean Marie has said, and I think we need to get through some other key things before this becomes anything more. So I do appreciate the idea of a white paper just to like memorialize kind of what's happened up to this point. But other than that, I would have no problem having this sit for a little bit and let us get through some of the other stuff that I know everybody's so busy doing.
John and Jean Marie, would it be appropriate after the white paper is complete, maybe to get on a council workshop for later in the summer, early fall? And then to Dan's point, maybe get some directive on how the working group might work and what the outcomes would be.
Yeah, and I think we need to me, it could be a broader conversation on conservation and what our priorities are from a conservation perspective and where these different activities kind of sit. Because we have the land bond, I think, coming up, that to me, that probably should be our top priority at this point, and I don't think we have room for anything else from a conservation perspective. And so again, I feel like we're doing too much right now and we need to prioritize and focus a bit more.
I agree.
I'm sorry, we're also working on the open space master plan, and that is slated to be complete next summer. And so that gives us that will give us a really good idea of what's left in the community to conserve and what we have out there. And then we're also working on the vulnerability study that's going to give us more information into our infrastructure and those things that need to be taking place. So maybe it's an appropriate conversation to be had closer to those
like
things.
linking those together.
Yeah. So it's not done in a silo of conservation, because the open space master plan is really gonna inform the 30 by 30.
Yeah, so my suggestion now is like, let's get this white paper done of kind of like the current state where we are, what we've learned, and going forward. Make sure that we, as a council, decide where this fits from a priority, and make sure that we can communicate that back to the Conservation Commission, whatever the council agrees, and make sure that we're prioritizing this appropriately. Again, because Autumn, like you just mentioned, there's so many other things going on right now that will probably make a better solution for this down the road, that we just don't need to rush it.
Yeah, and that's definitely where I've been coming from since day one when I found out about this. So that makes sense to me.
Okay. Right, we're actually right on time, 9:45. So any other last comments? we'll keep everybody informed about, want a summary of what's happened at the meeting. Sounds like we are going to do a couple of things, like think through what a white paper might be, tap into all of your expertise, as needed to develop that, and, really maybe work closer with Jean Marie and John about how we go about, or how they want to go about communicating to the council, this sort of plan that we're coming up with. So does that make sense to everyone?
Sure.
Okay, any other final comments? And I do have to ask one thing, I didn't send out a sheet, you're all set. Could I just ask everybody to check their name off the list or add it if it's not on there, in terms of attendance today? And thank you so much to Landry French for hosting us and providing snacks. Thank you, Angela and Autumn, for providing us a detailed presentation on where we are with both topics. We'll get those presentations out to everyone. Thank you to our counselors who have participated today and helped shape where things are with respect to the town's perspective. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks for taking this up.
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice week.
Okay.